welcome, good afternoon. It is my absolute delight and privilege to welcome you to the opening of Our Common Ground, 250 Years of Americans Engaging with Nature. This is brought to you by the Rare Book and Special Collections Division here at the Library of Congress. My name is Stephanie Stillo, and I am the proud chief of a truly amazing group of curators and librarians in the Rare Book Division that has brought this all together for you today. So as we settle in for a truly exceptional afternoon of talks and food and collection displays, I would like to center us a little bit on the concept of gratitude. There are many people that helped us find our footing for this symposium, for everything that you are going to see today. And to appropriately explain this, I want to take you on a very brief journey. The concept for this symposium began in 2024 with Patrick Hastings, RBSCD's outreach specialist, and you'll see him running around today. Patrick and I brainstormed an A250 event that would celebrate our love of American history and, of course, antiquarian collections. The next stop in our journey was with the Friends of the Library. So Patrick and I pitched an A250 symposium, as well as a series of educational videos that would include classroom packets for K-12 educators as part of our larger commitment to community engagement with on-site and off-site patrons. To our absolute delight, we were awarded the library's Friends' Choice Award and have been joyfully executing our mandate over the past year. If you're curious, the fruits of our labor can be seen both on YouTube and the library's website via our video series from the vaults, as well as our blog, Bibliomania. We are super proud of all of that, so please go check it out. Our gratitude to Friends of the Library and the James Madison Council simply cannot be overstated. Their continued support for the Rare Book Division's various outreach endeavors is nothing short of astonishing, and we are both grateful and humbled by their continued support. The final conceptual piece to our A250 puzzle came to us in July of 2025, when Ashley Rose Young joined the RBSCD team. Ashley and Patrick's fresh eyes and creativity have rightly challenged us to consider how our collections can have broader application and connection to the contemporary moment. Patrick and Ashley's combined creativity is the hallmark of today's programming and a harbinger of the years ahead. Now, as we all know, the ideas are wonderful, but logistics are a very beastly mountain to climb. And for this, I would like to extend a very special thanks to Stephanie Merkelbach, our amazing librarian in residence, all of our volunteers, and most significantly, Mariana Stell, who is running around doing something right now. Oh, there she is in the back. Mariana, I am utterly convinced that you make the sun rise and set. So thank you for making sure that we could all be here today. My colleagues have rightly reminded me that I am not allowed to be up here for too long, but I have a microphone, so I'm going to offer a few further thoughts to center us before we move into the rest of the program today. And I'm going to do this with one of my absolute favorite anecdotes, and it's certainly one that my colleagues have heard in the past. However, given our first speakers and performers, I think it bears repeating. So in 1933, when the Nazis forced the closing of the Berlin Bauhaus, artists Joseph and Annie Albers moved to the United States to start a new artist community in the town of Black Mountain, situated at the feet of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. It was there that Joseph Albers began teaching his famous classes on human perception of color. The Albers explored a simple but almost mystical phenomenon that when certain colors are placed next to one another in different combinations, they change. They become cooler or warmer. They can become muted. Sometimes they can all but disappear. However, with the right combination, what Albers called the right optical mixture, colors elevate one another. They harmonize and they strengthen. They become something that is more than the sum of their parts. Albers believed that color was a metaphor for social behavior, and more importantly, for community. Just like color, when people are placed in the right context, they elevate one another and they harmonize. They simply burn brighter. Our Common Ground is a symposium specifically designed to bring us together as a community of print and book enthusiasts, of nature lovers, of art buffs, of game enthusiasts and aficionados, and most importantly, absolute lovers of American history and culture. I encourage you to carry this spirit of community with you today, and let us all burn bright together. With all of that, I will hand it over to Dr. Ashley Rose Young to officially get us started for the day.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I can't keep the smile from my face because it is so great to finally see you today and enjoy this moment, or these many moments together. And I want to thank Stephanie for that marvelous introduction. And I'm going to take about 7 or 8 minutes now to contextualize our theme for the day and also showcase some of the beautiful objects that we have in our collection. First, I want to take a moment to talk about the early brainstorming of our Common Ground. We wanted this moment, this symposium, to be a celebration of all these disparate parts and people coming together, of course, how we create, how we play, how we adventure in nature. And I remember those early brainstorming sessions where we were throwing out ideas of the kinds of guest speakers that we might have come and join us today. How about a board game designer? What about a park ranger? Maybe an astronaut or someone from the Smithsonian? Definitely a book artist. And on the topic of the broader team who made the symposium possible, I am also sending out so much gratitude and love to the 20-plus person team that has made this day possible, but also to those individuals that Stephanie had mentioned previously, Mariana, Patrick, Stephanie, and Stephanie. This wouldn't be possible without you. Our team knew that focusing on nature was a little bit unconventional for celebrating America 250. And we knew that some of our ideas for speakers were also not really aligned with our traditional programming in the rare book division. And so it was really important for us to ground this day, to start this day with book arts and fine press collections, and to build off the success of some of our recent programming, like Making the Modern Book in 2023. I'm pressing down. I have to turn it on. Like Making the Modern Book in 2023 and Book Artists in the Studio in 2025. New to this world of book arts and fine press, I understood that my best education was actually going to come from the books themselves. And so I went into our vaults and I went to our artist books to see what I might find that aligns with nature. And I learned very, very quickly that nature, broadly conceived, was simply everywhere. Again and again, as I was pulling books off the shelf, I realized that artists weren't simply depicting nature. They were using landscapes and waterways, flora and fauna, to think about larger ideas, about identity, memory, belonging, and even nationhood itself. And many of these artists were also engaging with texts that were written decades or even centuries prior, bringing the past 250 years, in close conversation to our modern moment. And as a historian, that just made my heart sing a little bit. With this embarrassment of riches at our disposal, you can imagine putting the display together was really, really challenging. I had, of course, so much help from my colleagues, but also our wonderful guest speaker, Jessica C. White, whose deep knowledge of and interest in scrolls and the history of the book and wood engravings profoundly shaped the books that we have on display next door. I'd like to highlight a few of those items, and then I'll finally get to introducing Jessica. So one of the first books that I pulled off the shelf was Tom Killian's The Coast of California. And I did this after our team got together and watched a YouTube video of Tom talking about his process and talking about his work. And just hearing how passionately he spoke about that, I just couldn't wait to get into the vaults and find some of his books. And wow, when I opened the pages, I just, again, a huge smile just came across my face, and I was like, this is it. This is so beautiful. And my heart began aching for the mountains and for the sea. I just had this sense of wanting to be enveloped by those forms of nature. And so I was gushing about Tom's work, and my colleagues were like, well, you also have to check out Richard Wagner's and Barry Moser's wood engravings. And so I did. I pulled those off the shelf, and here we have some of Richard Wagner's work. And from afar, it kind of looks like this is a book of black and white photography. But if you get closer, especially with the help of a magnifying glass, you start to see the shocking detail of his medium, the minuscule lines and curves that he has made in the woodblock. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. And I encourage you, when you visit the display next door, to pick up a magnifying glass, get close, spend some time with these beautiful wood engravings. Now, we also have Barry Moser's wood engravings, and they evoke an entirely different reaction when I look at them. I think he captures the terrifying side of nature in his depictions of Moby Dick. He's demonstrating that nature can be threatening and mysterious as much as it can be beautiful and awe-inspiring. And if you think these illustrations are gorgeous, you are going to love Gaylord Shannelec's Technicolor wood engravings. These are a beautiful contrast to the black and white illustrations in Wagner's and Moser's works. And these works don't simply represent nature. They are also products of a physical engagement with nature and materials from nature, wood, paper, and pigments. There's something fitting, I think, about artists using one part of nature to depict and represent another part of it. I think that's ultimately what today is about. Not simply celebrating nature, but celebrating the many ways that Americans have used art and storytelling and print to make meaning from the world around us. And our guest speaker, Jessica C. White, is remarkably adept at this. She draws inspiration from Appalachian storytelling traditions, East Asian narrative scrolls, and many other forms that she'll highlight in her talk. Animals and natural landscapes feature in many of her works, bringing whimsy, yes, but whimsy at times that is tinged with an edge of melancholy and a deep reflection on human nature. An educator as well as an artist, Jessica is a masterful storyteller and an ambassador of book arts, and I'm honored to have her with us here today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. I want to say a big thank you to Ashley for such a wonderful welcome. Also, just thank you to the amazing team here at Library of Congress who invited me out. It is such an incredible honor for me to be here and be a part of this really interesting symposium and to help celebrate our 250th. So thank you for having me. I am going to tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Jessica White. I actually studied sculpture at an undergrad at East Carolina University, but while I was there, I got a job at the university library. I really got it just because I wanted some air conditioning. It was really hot there. But while I was there, I was hired to work in the conservation lab, and I didn't know this even existed. So they taught me how to repair and conserve books while I was at the library, and it just took me off into a whole new direction from there. After that, I went on to work as a paper conservator at the Northeast Document Conservation Lab up in Springfield, Massachusetts, and then from there I went on to University of Iowa, where I earned an MFA in printmaking, and I studied as a graduate student in the certificate program at the Book Studies lab there at University of Iowa. So when I tell you about what my work is about, it's really rooted in historic book structures. And so I want to give you some context about what I really fell in love with and how it's evolved into my work. But first of all, book history and book art history is vast. And we don't have the time for all of that. I don't have time to tell you all of that. But I'm going to give you kind of a whirlwind tour and to set the stage for what you're going to see in this display and then with my own work. So I have here an example of some early record keeping, Sumerian clay tablets. So what we're seeing is cuneiform that's impressed into clay using wooden wedges. And this is just one of the examples of early pictographs and hieroglyphic writings around the world at that time and how humans started just collecting records in this way. And this particular one is a boat rental receipt. So it's just basic everyday record keeping. While over in Southeast Asia, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, we see them using the materials that are found in nature in that area, which are palm leaves. And so they were taking palm leaves, taking strips of palm leaves, scribing into them with sharp tools, and then using a dark substance like a soot or charcoal to rub into those scratches so that they could read the writings. And now they're keeping records in this way where they're stacked up into these stacks. There's cords that are inserted through them to hold them together, plus wooden boards on top and bottom to protect it. And these would have been like account ledgers. So again, just basic everyday record keeping. And then over in Mesoamerica, we have a whole nother way of keeping records. And in this way, it's we're sort of pushing the envelope of what a book might be considered and what the world of book arts can be. And so for me, it fits in because this is record keeping, and it's an interesting way of record keeping. They've formed knots along these strands of either cotton or wool animal fibers, and depending on the size of the knot and where it's located on the strand, it means something different. And so this was how they were keeping their records in this other part of the world. And then I'm heading over to the Mediterranean, where we have something a little bit different. It's starting to look a little bit more like the book as we know it, right? We have these wax tablets. They're carved out of wood, basically a shallow tray that's then filled with wax. And they would take a stylus, a sharp stylus, and scratch into that wax. And something that's different about these wax tablets, they are not meant for longevity. They're not meant to be kept because once you're done, it's like a scratch pad. Once you're done with those notations, you flip your stylus over at a flat side and you would just scrape over it and create a nice flat surface. You can start from scratch again. And I wanted to include these two images here because there's some people who look at these images that we see on ancient Greek pottery and say, what are they doing on their iPads and their laptops from back then? And the reason is they're probably on these wax tablets. And so all of this is to set the stage for one particular part of book evolution. So what I wanted to show you is that, this idea of what a book can be and how it can be used and the materials that they can be made from is just as large as the world itself and the different people that live here. And we use the materials that are accessible to us. But one particular one that really largely influenced me was the study of scrolls and how the scroll structure evolved. And so I wanted to start us at the Library of Alexandria. And you can see here that the shelves are there, but what we see on the shelves are a little bit different. You're seeing scrolls, and the ends of the scrolls are on the shelves, and there would be little tabs at the end that designate, which each scroll is about. You'll see at the bottom of this image, there's also like a bucket. So they would store them in buckets, they would store them in shelves, anywhere where there was space, because this was also one of the largest libraries in the world at the time. They don't really know the exact number of how many manuscripts they had there, but they're thinking anywhere from 40,000 to 400,000. So it was a pretty extensive collection. Now, we are here in the Mediterranean and especially northern Egypt, where papyrus is a plant that grows plentifully along the Nile. And so at that time, a lot of the scrolls that you would have seen, especially in that part of the world, were made from papyrus. Papyrus is a plant that has these long stalks that would have been cut into these strips, and the strips would then be layered on a board and then hammered so that the fibers sort of mesh together and create these long strips of really nice writing substrate that was good for drawings and writings, and they also just lend themselves really well to this curling up scroll kind of structure. Now, I just want to mention that a lot of the works that I'm talking about here in these slides are, and I'll show you with the next one especially, we're talking about an 18th century scroll here. Some of the scrolls that existed were much earlier than this, but the examples that we have largely kind of decayed, disintegrated, and they don't really visually look exactly like what they look like. So some of the examples that I'm showing you in the slideshow are more contemporary or just more recent examples, just to give you a sense of what that structure might have looked like when they were first made. So, along with papyrus, we also had scrolls made from parchment, animal skins. Also over in northern Africa and Morocco, and then down in Ethiopia, where you see scrolls that are hung vertically, and these were talismanic scrolls, as in they were like healing scrolls that they would hang over their bed to ward off evil spirits. And then if we travel all the way over to China, we also see scrolls as a structure that they use prevalently. And in China, we're seeing scrolls that were first made with these bamboo slips. Strips of bamboo that were cut into thin strips and then strung together with thread across the top and bottom that made it really nicely easy to scroll up. And I just want you to notice that the writing is in this vertical column in the way that works best for this material that they've used for this record keeping. And they would have scratched into it with a sharp stylus in the same way that you see in the palm leaf manuscripts. Scratched into it and then something dark rubbed into the scratches like soot or charcoal so that it was more legible. Now a little bit later on, we've got the invention of paper coming around 100 CE, 105 CE, and so they started replacing the bamboo strips with paper as a substrate. It's lighter, it's easier to make, and it's just more accessible. And in this example, we have we see one that's mounted on silk to give it a little bit more strength and durability. But what I find interesting, as you can see here, is the writing has stayed the same. It stays in these columns, and it reads from right to left, which really began with those bamboo strips. So it's really like the materials are telling you how to make your tools, and then the tools keep telling you how to grow and evolve. Now, at some point along the way, instead of rolling it up into a scroll, these long strands of paper were then folded accordion style, and this is what it's called. And we're starting to look at, we're starting to see these structures turn into this rectangular format into something that we might call a book that we see today. Now, I want to mention while I'm in this moment here, actually, I'll show you this one first, and then I'll come back to this thought that I just had. You can also do this with the bamboo slips. It doesn't have to be just with the paper structures. So they are also taking these bamboo slips, folding them rather than rolling them up, and then putting a piece of wood on the top and a piece of wood on the bottom and strapping it together for extra security. Now, the way I'm depicting some of this and the way I'm describing it, it's like there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. And this is not at all how history and book history and book evolution has happened. There's a lot of overlap, and depending on where you are and what time and place, this is not like a straightforward linear progression. So I don't want you to think that we're just going through chronologically. Like all of this is happening all at the same time in different parts of the world. Because also over here in Mesoamerica, we see these written documents on the Mayan bark papers. So they were making something sort of like a paperish substance. It wasn't quite the same as what they were making over in China, but they were hammering bark fibers into very thin sheets and then creating something very similar that was also very good for record keeping. And here we have an example of what would have been like astrological, astronomical, meteorological kind of records. There's really a lot for agriculture at the time. We don't have a lot of these in existence because when early Spanish explorers came and found these, they burned them in pyres, and many, many of these were burned, and I think there are only 12 in existence now, so it's really special that we have even just a few that we can research and study. And one of the things that were really interesting, and I'm forgetting which explorer it was now, but they described what they saw when they found these written documents, and they didn't even call it a book. Like for them, that wasn't even considered a book. They called it just like writings on paperish things folded like blankets was what how they described it, and then they threw it in the fire. And so we only have a few in existence, so it's good that we didn't see these still. Now we're going to move forward into a time where there was really kind of a shift in the structure of the book. The materials have stayed pretty much the same. We're looking at folded sections of papyrus that are then sewn through the fold. So suddenly we have sewing coming into play. It's not just rolled up, it's not just folded, but they're actually sewn so that there's like a stack of papers that are sewn and folded, wrapped with some leather to help protect it. And this example is the Nag Hammadi codices that you would find in this part of Egypt near the Nile. And let's see. Along with this single section folding, they also developed a new kind of sewing where it was taking multiple sections. So in this example, you can see how instead of just one folded stack of papers, there are many of them stacked together, sewn together, and again, you start to see the wooden boards come to the front and back, giving them some extra support. Now, I wanted to show you also the pouch that they carried it in. So this is a development by the Coptic Christians in northern Africa, and they were nomadic peoples. And so they took these books that they were creating, put them into these pouches, double pouched, put in a pouch, put another one, and there's like a sling, they hung it around their neck, and then they would travel. And the important thing that I want to show you here is that this is the trek that they traveled from Egypt, northern Africa, near the River Nile, down into the Horn of Africa. And so the beauty of this is why a lot of these books are still existing today, and we can still see them, because a lot of them are left behind in the Sahara Desert, and the arid climate really preserved a lot of these books, so we're able to study them today. For a lot of us, if any of you have taken any book workshops, a lot of us will take the first book workshop that you take, and it's a Coptic binding, and this is what it's based on, basically, the research that people have done on these early sewn structures. This was a change not only in just the structure of the book, but I just want to point out that now we're accessing our information in a different way. So there's a shift from linear reading to indexical reading. Basically, linear in a scroll would be you can move forward or back in a scroll, right? But in indexical reading, you can actually take a book and flip to any page that you want to. So in a sense, sort of like if you go to the back of a book and look up in an index what you want to find, and it's on page 79, and you can just flip straight to that page and go to it. And so we're accessing information differently, and I think that something that this is very unique to this particular sect of people. They were very early Christians, and they really wanted to show they wanted to record their new religion in a different way. So this really stood out from the typical text of the time, the Torah on a scroll, the Buddhist sutras who were also on a scroll. But here we have a new religion on a new structure, accessed in a different way. So something that I like to say is, if you think about even today, if you were to go to a Christian church service, the pastor might ask everybody to pull out their Bibles and verse, and to think about how everybody can get to it within a few minutes. And within a few minutes, the entire congregation, we're all looking at the same passage, studying the same thing all together as a group. Now imagine if we were still using scrolls, and everybody had to pull a scroll out and like scroll through and try to find that same passage. So it not only changes the way we read, but the way we study independently, but also as a group too. Anyone who's had to call a help desk or maybe dealt with new technology can maybe relate to this a little bit. I just wanted to point out that there's no really right or wrong way. At this time, they were making these books in this way with these multiple signatures, different kinds of sewing. People were figuring it as they go. And so there are a lot of different ways to sew a book. There's sort of like this idea of there's a standard Coptic binding, but as you can see in this photo, lots of different ways to do it. And just as a quick throw in there, this is something that I love exploring too. So in some of my own books that I use today, and you'll see a lot of other book artists out there today who is also exploring these long and linked stitches and how we can convert a lot of this historic binding into contemporary book arts. So from there, I want to talk a little bit about the book arts that we have on display here and how that relates to some of what I'm looking at in my own work and how my own work has evolved. So I have pulled out a few that are very traditional kind of idea of what a book art, or a book, an artist book can be. And one of my favorites is Southern Harvest by English artist and author Claire Leighton. And this was published in 1942, and it is of her writings and her wood engravings based on stories of her time spent living in the American South. And so what I really love is seeing it sort of from a different person's perspective. It's not necessarily from someone who's living here, but visiting from another place. And I love that she is sort of learning about the place. There are some chapters about the flora and fauna of the South, but she's really learning about this particular place through the people here. Whereas we have Gaylord Chanelec, who published Mayflies of the Driftless Region, and he is a printer and wood engraver who worked together with entomologist Clark Gary, who did the writing for this book. And for them, they were really exploring this place called the Driftless Region through the fauna, flora, and the mayflies, specifically the species of mayflies that live there. And for those of you who aren't aware of the Driftless Region, it's a specific area out in the Midwest that covers parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois, and it's the part where the glaciers never reach, as the glaciers flattened the earth as it traveled. But there's this one area in this part of the country where there's like really deep, craggy cliffs and valleys, and so it's a very rugged terrain. So it's a very unique kind of a place for the flora and fauna that live there. Along with those traditional books that we know and love, I really wanted to have us think about how the idea of what a book can be, and also the idea of collecting. So I just love that the Wonder Cabinet, the name of this book is The Wonder Cabinet. It's The Curious Worlds of Barbara Hodgson and Claudia Cohen from 2011. It's an limited edition artist book that reimagines the 16th and the 18th century cabinets of curiosities, and it merges text, imagery, and physical objects to explore the themes of collection and display. What does it mean to collect? We also have modern artists, contemporary artists, who are taking very historic structures into play and thinking about how we could take something like this quipu. This is a Chicani quipu by Cecilia Vicuña, and how you can take that kind of a structure and reinterpret it, reimagine it to tell a contemporary story with tied knots on wool. And then we have History of a Felling by Anne Cavell. And in this book, Anne explores the act of clear-cutting a 25-foot wide swath of land. And this was to make the 49th parallel boundary between the United States and Canada. This was back in the 1860s. It's a huge swath of land, and for her, this was an exploration of how that clear-cutting, through the numerous protected parks and natural reserves, really severed the common ecologies in that area and the sheer landscape simply because of this political divide. And so for Anne, it is about learning about this place, not just through what's there, but how the humans have interacted with the nature and how we interpret what we can do and how we use it and how we make the changes that we do for political reasons in some cases. Something that I love about this book too is Anne has taken the idea of a book, and you can see in this it's a tunnel book. You don't have any pages to flip, you don't have a scroll to roll through, but it's set up in a way that it creates like a tunnel format, and you look through one end down the other, and in some ways it creates kind of like a theatrical aspect. It has sort of a theatrical playfulness to it. Which takes me to The Historiscope, a panorama of history of America, published by Milton Bradley in 1868. And so they call this a panorama theater stage. It has approximately 25 scenes depicting American historic events. And so we're taking books into more of this sort of theatrical realm of what we could do with a book structure and how it can be also playful. Now, I'm a crankie maker as well, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about crankies later on, but I just wanted to show you that this is also out there on display. So let me tell you a little bit more about what I do in my own work. I started with a traditional book. This is sort of like the Nagamati book. It's a single folded section sewn through the fold. In this book, I really tried my best to learn every aspect of book arts. So the cover is handmade paper, the text is hand-set type, and it's printed, and then that little wood engraving on the side of an elephant was actually done in a workshop with Gaylord Chanelec with the mayflies. And so it was my sort of stumbling blocks of kind of figuring out, and it was not a very well done book, but it was a very good learning experience. I figured out, I couldn't even get the block to print correctly in the book. As you can tell, it's printed sideways, but it was the best I could do with what I knew at the time. But I got better. I made some more books, and I ended up making this one called The Lost Land, and this is also letterpress printed with handset type, with covers that are covered in wasp nest to have that tactile kind of quality as you're reading it. And it's about a decay. It's about losing memories and about decay. This is an interesting structure because it's called a do-si-do, and so it has two spines. It's one book with two spines. On this side is the English version of what is originally a Chinese story. So on the other side is the Chinese original story. It's written by Lawrence Peng, who is a Hong Kong-based writer who was also at the University of Iowa in the writing program when I was there too. So I asked him if I could publish his story. So the beauty of this structure is that you can have the original and the translation and have them bound in one single book. And I just want to show you what it looks like. When I'm setting the type, it is literally bits of metal in my hand set that is then printed on these types of antique presses. Along with these traditional books, I really love to explore how we tell stories through just imagery. And so I love to make image-based books using animals. I really love using animals as they do in folktales and children's book illustrations, children's books. And for this book, it is an accordion structure. I'm starting to go a little bit longer and stretched out. And there's a quote by Thoreau in here. It says, "They are all beasts of burden, in a sense made to carry some portion of our thoughts." And so for the next few slides, I just want to show you that along with making these books, I was also making prints as well. And even in my prints, I'm influenced by book illustration. And so I really drew from the history of children's book illustrations with a little bit of caption and a little bit of storytelling narrative where you kind of wonder what's going on. None of these are actually part of a larger story. They're just sort of vignettes, and you fill in the story on your own. And these are my most recent works, prints, the most recent prints that I've made, two that were just made in the last 2 years. The small text in the one that's pink, it says, "Storms make trees take deeper roots." This is a quote by country singer Dolly Parton. I printed this soon after our region was devastated by Hurricane Helene, and it's really a celebration of people who are sticking around and rebuilding. And then the one on the right is my Appalachian version of the saying, "See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil." And it's a little bit of a self-portrait of me sitting in the woods knitting for those wolves. I also have continued practicing wood engraving. I like to add sayings that I find kind of interesting. Sometimes I'm inspired by the saying, sometimes I start with the imagery and then add a saying to it. And just to let you know a little bit about what wood engraving is and what you're going to see in this display too, is a cross-section piece of wood that is then scratched into with very fine tools. And in this way you can get very, very fine details. So you can kind of see in this image how there's like still bark remaining on the edges of the block of wood. I improved on my elephant engraving. I made another one. I feel like I'm getting better, so I'm revisiting some old engravings. This is made to look like it's pulled out of a book. So again, all of my prints really still refer back to bookishness. It's not actually pulled out of a book, it just looks like it. And currently I'm working on a woodcut graphic novel about growing up in Taiwan using these wood engraving skills. So it's sort of a side project. It's been going on, honestly, for maybe about 10 years now, on and off. I do this in my spare time. But I'm going to take you back just a little bit back to where I was really working with scrolls. So this was actually my thesis project when I was at University of Iowa. And this is a scroll that measures 20 feet long, letterpress printed from my drawings, and handset lead type with some hand coloring. It's a story about animals meeting in the forest to wage war. But at 20 feet long, it is really hard to navigate. And when I showed it to people, I noticed that just the act of moving through the scroll kind of took over, and they never really saw the story. And nobody made it through all 20 feet. So I actually considered it a little bit of a failure. So I kind of set it aside, and it was like, it's pretty to look at, but it didn't work. I moved to Asheville. I started working in a studio. I started teaching at Warren Wilson College. And while I was there, I saw a show by this duo, Anna and Elizabeth, and you can see in between them there is a structure called a crankie. So they taught everybody there at the show about the history of these crankie structures in the Appalachian region, where Appalachian bands would be traveling through the mountains and they would sing their songs, but also have a crankie as a visual aid that illustrates the story that they're singing. And that is when I had my eureka moment. I saw their crankie, I saw their show. It was mind-blowing. And I said, oh, that is exactly what my 20-foot long scroll needs to be. So I made a box for it, and I made a crankie out of it. But in my mind, of course, my inquisitive mind, I also have lower down, you see a little drawer there? I digitally printed the same story in a digital format as an accordion. So you can see sort of like the difference between flipping through the pages indexically, or you can scroll through the crankie itself linearly. And this is on display in the other room right now. So since then, I've made quite a few more crankies, and I'm showing you this image because for a while, in my mind, I saw this one crankie that was in a wooden box. I thought they all needed to be in wooden boxes, so kind of went back to my early days of sculpture and started making these wooden boxes. And notice that mine are quite small because they are books to me. They are like my little bookish objects. And so with my background in fine art and book studies, this is how I see my books, or these crankies. They're hanging up on the wall. I make these prints. This particular one is 5 feet long, so I framed it, hung it up on the wall, and the crankie is on a pedestal in front of it. And they're all carved from linoleum and printed and editioned, just like a book would be. But in the last couple years, I've ventured into something completely new. Instead of just putting it on a pedestal or putting it on a shelf, I went to Minneapolis Cranky Fest, and they put me up on a stage to perform a crankie for the first time. And I brought what I thought was a great big crankie. In book size, it's big, but in cranky size, it's actually kind of small. And so they helped me figure out how to project it onto a screen so more people could see it. And so I started learning a lot more about crankies in all different parts of the world, especially the theatrical aspects of it, how they're used in puppet shows and performances and made large to have more of an impact in shows. And this is an image of me at the Asheville Cranky Fest, the first one my friend and I just put on recently, displaying all the cranky work that comes out of our Western North Carolina region. And later on today, I'm going to have a cranky show with all these crankies that you see up here on stage. So I hope you'll come back and join me for that. Thank you very much.
So we now have about 10 minutes for Q&A. If anyone has questions, I'll run the mic over to you.
Great. Okay.
Thank you. So I saw early on that there was Sun Tzu's The Art of War in the accordion style with bamboo. Is that really the entire text? Did they fit all of that into what looked like a relatively small format?
I don't think the entire text is in that one block of text, but I think they did have them all in that format. It would just be it would have been a volume of them, as a set. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jackie, and I'm a rare book cataloger here at the library, and I've never heard the word cranky before. So is the word cranky a real thing?
It is.
Is it a thing that should be in our catalog, I guess is my question.
I would say it is, because that's sort of the term that most of us are using for these structures now. And I know in some of the readings that I've done, they've been called panoramas or scrolls, but most people who make them now, we all call them crankies. Don't ask me how to spell it, because depending on who you ask, it's spelled a different way. But I spell it with the IE.
I think historically we've here at the library we've been calling them movable panoramas.
Yeah.
And I like cranky much better. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious, Jessica, since I also make crankies, how do you choose the stories that you're going to make a crankie about? Because I know it takes a really long time to make one.
Yeah. So some of my earliest ones are really just stories that I would have put into a print, but I needed to say more about it. So it's just like something that a little story that I'm interested in. But in the past couple years, I've started finding songs that inspire me. So I really love making crankies now that are set to a song. And for me, it's really about hearing, how it is when you hear a new album and there's like that one song that really stands out and you listen to it over and over and over again. And if there are visuals that come to my mind, that's the one I go with. But there is one up here, and Kevin and Jeff are going to be telling you more about it later, where I was inspired by a story that they wrote that was published in an article online about the area that we live in. And so that was such a powerful story that I felt like it needed to be put out into the world in a way that made people sort of stop and pay attention.
Are there many crankies that exist from you talked about, the Appalachian singers would carry them. It seems like a really neat piece of like folk art. Are there, older ones in museums or in collections, or were they used so often that they probably just eventually kind of, fell apart?
There are a few that you can find in different collections. I don't know of any one particular collection that holds a lot of them, but I know there are a few that are specific to, usually to the place where they're made. So like one that I haven't seen yet, but it is on my bucket list, is at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and they have a crankie up there about whaling. So they do exist. And I think you're right, though, that in a lot of cases, they were not really necessarily meant to be museum pieces. They were meant to be traveled and used, and they probably were like falling apart. And I bet there are a bunch of them like stored away in someone's attic or basement that I hope we can unearth and put out where we can see them.
So seeing these, I can't help but think of panoramic photography, which then makes me think of cyclorama painting, where you have a 360-degree, wall paintings. And is there any historical relation to cyclorama style and cranky style, or is that the story that's being told is continuous motion with a crankie versus one single image for a cyclorama?
For me and for some of the histories that I've read about it, I feel like they sort of fall into that same world, right? So there's like a moving scroll image, whether it's small and in a box or some that are large that fill up an entire room. They sort of have the same effect. And so I would put them along in that same sort of timeline of existing in the same world. And I have a friend who does work with like photographic toys and like flip books and these kinds of things. And I feel like we also sort of live in the same world. And so in a lot of ways, crankies for me, because I'm a book artist, it falls into the world of books. But if you were to talk to somebody else, it is a toy. And if you talk to somebody else, it is theater. So it falls into a lot of different worlds in many different ways. Yeah.
Finally got the mic back. So, Jessica, thank you so much. This is beautiful. I also encourage everybody to hang out. We are going to do a cranky performance. I'm so excited about it. But I selfishly grabbed the microphone again. One of the things that I love about your talk, and we've just that we love about you in general, is this idea of how much you do really think about historic book structure. So when you go and sort of research, and I will say that I think you're researching with us a little bit tomorrow, which is quite lovely. So how do you approach a collection and thinking about being inspired and, as a book artist, as a creative human, as somebody that's interested in the longer history of the book, like how do you go about researching your ideas for all of this? And this is something I think other people have touched on, but I love the idea of artists talking about how they utilize archives or how they utilize special collections.
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to your question about where do you go to see these historic crankies, and they are really hard to find, and so that's not actually what I research. But for me, it is about the story. It's about how it tells a story, and so when I do my research, I really love to look at especially historic Japanese scrolls that tell stories in that linear fashion. And so for me, a lot of this talk was about structure, about how it moves and how it's displayed, but the content itself is really about the tales that we are telling about the world that we live in, and visually. So I really love how stories can be told with just images. So I look at wordless graphic novels, I look at Japanese scrolls, things like even like tapestries, like the Bayou Tapestry is a historic example of a way of telling stories in that kind of scroll form. And so I'm not necessarily looking for a cranky, but I'm looking for things that will inspire my ideas to kind of rise to the surface in a similar way. And for me, and I think for a lot of other book artists too, we look at some of these historic examples, and it always goes back to, okay, how can I take that and bring it into a contemporary context? How can I use what I see here and make it work for what I want to say in today's world? Yeah. Yeah.